Now, Lincoln's beginnings are rather humble. In fact, he came from a very poor family in Kentucky, and rural Kentucky for that matter, and when he was asked by a biographer to explain his early childhood, he said that one sentence would describe it. He actually quoted the old poet Thomas Gray by saying, "My life was the short and simple annals of the poor." Indeed it was. His father was somebody who was probably illiterate. He could not read. His mother came from an illegitimate family. Her parents were not married, so she had kind of grown up with the stigma around her. But yet she was someone who took great kindness upon her son, as all mothers do, and she actually taught him to read. In fact, really instilled that love of learning in the young Abraham Lincoln. However, she died when he was only 9 years old. And Lincoln and his father, by most accounts, were not always on the best terms with each other. But one thing his father did give him was a real appreciation of a work ethic. And the way that he did this was he hired Lincoln out regularly to help pay the family's bills. And so Lincoln, as a young man, actually learned several frontier skills when his father would hire him out to various people within the county. For example, he learned everything from rafting and boat making to carpentry to butchering to forestry, to how you actually construct a fence, or storekeeping, or brewing, or distillation, actually the creation of certain alcoholic drinks. Now, all these things may seem wide and varied, but they were all essential frontier skills in those days. Eventually, Lincoln, who always had this love of things written, really saw the power of the word as being something very important, as it always has been, taught himself the grammar of English. In fact, got a little English grammar, worked through it until he understood everything. He eventually went on and would actually trade book after book as he read them. He read everything from Aesop's Fables to Pilgrim's Progress to Robinson Crusoe to Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is a rather thick work, and even things such as the biographies of George Washington or Benjamin Franklin. And most famously, he read the Statutes of Illinois, the actual series of laws that the state of Illinois had passed at that time, and they say that he memorized most of them because he knew them by heart. Lincoln had incredible gifts. For example, he was a natural storyteller. He was the kind of man that when he told a tale, people stopped and they listened. He was also someone who was very witty. He always had a response to give. He's kind of like Winston Churchill or Ronald Reagan in that regard. He was also someone who often kept notes about what he was thinking or about what he was planning to do. And people who knew him well or who cleaned up after him, such as his wife, for example, from time to time, would find notes throughout his pockets, throughout the drawers of his desk, on various tables and various areas of the house regularly. But he was somebody who kept all the information organized in his mind. He may write it down, but he typically didn't come back to those. He, of course, in terms of physique, was very tall. He was lanky. He was known for his great strength. They said that he could pick up an entire barrel that was full of some heavy liquid with a single arm and lift it from the floor to the table or to the countertop. He was also somebody who often struggled with things like depression, actually finding his way in this world and finding a meaning to this life. In fact, he wrote famously in his journal that he didn't carry a knife with him because he was afraid he might harm himself with it. So Lincoln really is a very complex man. Of course, the thing about Lincoln is he's known for his honesty. He's actually nicknamed Honest Abe, as you've probably heard in the past. And indeed, he was. In fact, he became a storekeeper early on in his life, had a partner. Together, they went into debt, some $1,100 into debt, which was a significant amount of money back in those days. And this debt was something that they intended to pay off with the profits from the store. There was just one problem. His partner ran away with much of the money, and Lincoln really had little dealing with him afterwards. Still, instead of going and trying to get out of the debt or just running away himself, Lincoln famously kept the store going, eventually would practice law as well, but he would pay off the debt. And of course, stories are told about how somebody left spare change on the counter and Lincoln would run after them for miles to hand back the spare change. Those stories, even though they sound legendary, are largely true. In fact, as a lawyer, he became one of the best paid lawyers in all of Illinois, at one point earning 3 times the amount of money in a single year that the Illinois governor earned. But he was also known there for his honesty. There were times where he would actually be given a sum of money to take a case, and he would say, "No, you've paid me too much for the amount of work here," and he would give the refund back. But he was also very just, so that if he was hired to take a case and he thought he was being paid too little for the amount of work, he would tell them, "Listen, if you want me to complete this work, you must pay more." So one of the things I love about Lincoln is, yes, he was honest, but honesty doesn't always mean that you sacrifice justice. He was someone who thought about what a fair price for things actually should look like.